My point is that mass resistance is based on information. That we are living in the age of information. We are living in the age of visual information. Most people don't read books anymore. I think this is probably the last institution where you're going to be required to read a book in order to go somewhere. Most people don't read books. Information is intelligence. And what that means is you become accountable and responsible for what you know. If you know something's wrong and you don't act on it, then what does that say about you? You know, ignorance of the law is no excuse. You know, you go into the courtroom and tell the judge, I didn't know this was the law. Your ass is still going to jail. He'll tell you ignorance of the law is no excuse. What you don't know can get you killed in this age of information. So it behooves you to find out what it is that's important to you and your family for your survival. And once you find that out, you need to move on it. We have to learn that the people that's controlling this country do not have our best interests at heart, and we cannot survive in this system that they control. So it's mind over matter. We don't mind and they don't matter. You have to fixate yourself on what you want to do with your life. You came into this building to get an education, to prepare you for the real world, because that's what education is. It's the training of people into the standards and values and ideals of the dominant society so that you can become part and parcel of that status quo and advance it. Elitist education is designed to create the administrators of this type of arrangement, the managers of the system. The ordinary schleps and workers and minions, they go to public school. They don't reach college. They wind up in dead-end jobs. But your future's supposed to be bright. You're supposed to be educated. You're supposed to be equipped to become professionals. You are supposed to be successful in life. And the question then becomes, how do we measure success? Do we measure success by our humanity? Or do we measure success by the type of car we drive? Or the clothes we wear? How do we measure success in our lives? This is your decision. But I'm here to tell you this, that this world will not grant you an iota of freedom unless you take it. That the only reason they're doing to us what they're doing today is because we let them. We let them. The only reason we have a choice between ho and hum, between Obama and some cracker from the right, is because we have not formed a third party. We have not organized our misery. We have not organized our disenfranchisement. We have not created a force in this country that has to be reckoned with. We are told that we only can survive inside the matrix, inside the contents of the two-party system. So you are confronted with a system that, first of all, is broken from the beginning because there's only two parties. And then on top of all of that, it's a winner-take-all system. It's an electoral college system. So the masses of people could vote for one person, and the electoral college could decide that the loser is the winner. And how do you get rid of the electoral college? You can't, because you have to have 3/5 of the Congress and a congressional amendment to change the electoral system. You're not going to get that because the states that have the electoral system are the ones that benefit from it. Notice that all of the presidential campaigns, the primary campaigns, are carried out in states where there's more cows than people. Where there's more, serious. They're carried out in states where there's more horses than individuals. They spend, every time you see them campaigning, they in rural Ohio, Montana. I said, man, what is this? And they're talking to these people as if they are the constituency of America. And then towards the end of the campaign, they come to the ghetto. and tell you about how they've always been for civil rights. And they've always been for voting rights. And then we have to resist these cutbacks on voting rights. We are the only people that our civil liberties have to be revisited every 10 years. Every 10 years, we got to revisit voting rights. What did that tell you? That tells you was never a citizen from the beginning. If you got to revisit my citizenship every 10 years, there's something wrong. That's like a passport. You got to reapply every 10 years. If they decide to give it to you, cool. If they don't, you got to appeal it. Our civil liberties are revisited every 10 years. And every time they revisit it, they have a new game. They have a new script. They have a new reason for revisiting it. Now we're talking about fighting for the Voting Rights Act. Again, that the Koch brothers and his crew are financing all of these underhanded methods to deny black folks the vote. Because it's no longer possible to do what they did back in the old days when they used to go to the poll, have to pay a poll tax, or you go to the poll and they ask you a bunch of esoteric questions, or they ask you for your great-great-great-grandmother's footprint to show that she's a citizen. And you say, my great-great-grandmother was a slave. Well, so you can't vote. So we had to fight for 50 years for that. Once we achieve that and you get the vote, then they tell us, well, you know, people are abusing the vote. People are abusing this. So we got to do it 10 more years down the line, and over, and you don't get tired of this. It's telling you that our analysis somewhere is skewed. That our understanding of racism in America and race politics in America is somehow off the mark. Because we keep doing the same thing over and over again. We keep fighting the same fight over and over again. How is that possible? It's possible because you're stupid. It's possible because you don't understand that the issue of race in America is also a broader issue of domestic colonialism. Our history is not the history of immigrant Italians coming in crying at the Statue of Liberty as they pass. Okay? It's not a mouse coming down the Anchor and Ratatouille in New York who wants to be an Italian chef. It's not an Italian mouse who stowed away on a ship and wants to be a chef. It's not. We have a whole different history. And that history is intertwined and interwoven into the history of this European settler state that became the most powerful nation on the planet. When urbanization occurred in America, we were right there involved in the urbanization. That's how we got into ghettos. When World War II was being fought and the workforce in America was being geared up to fight a war, we went to the cities of Oakland and the various places by military bases and worked as laborers and loaders. And in these areas that where we went to became what's now known as the hood, as ghettos. But when you look at the demography, when you look at the statistics, these very same ghettos, if they were outside of the country, would be a colony. All of the resources go out to community. The workforce even leaves the community to work and come back to sleep. Much like apartheid. Domestic colonialism is what evolved in America in order to deal with surplus labor, in order to deal with a working class that was no longer useful to white supremacy. That's where the school to prison pipeline comes from. It's not the school to the manufacturing pipeline, not the school to the factory pipeline, not the school to the workplace pipeline, but to jail. And now jail is so big, it's a multi-billion-dollar a year business. It's privatized. You're not going to turn this back. You're not going to turn this back. There's too much money and interest involved in it being the way it is. What you have to do, and the only way to stop this, is you have to challenge it at every level, and you have to make it not work. You have to say to yourself, that when you leave this hall, I'm not going to be a reformist. I'm going to be an abolitionist. Frederick Douglass is my ideal. Abolish it. Not reform it, abolish it. Reform has some benefit. But abolishment is what we need to be about. We need a new abolitionist movement. We have to talk about, when we talk about prisons, we have to talk about abolishing them as they're presently constituted. When we talk about police, law enforcement, we have to abolish institutional policing as it's presently constituted. We're not against policing. We're against the police policing us for the plutocracy. That's what we're against. Police are supposed to protect the community, empower the community. So why don't they live amongst us? Why don't the police why isn't there a residency clause? See, start talking that stuff and see where reform gets you. The police unions are going to come out of the woodwork to oppose this. They're going to oppose decentralization of the police, decentralization of public safety. Why are they closing fire departments in the black community when we have young people out on these streets with no skills and no jobs? Why don't we have volunteer firemen? Why aren't we training them and putting them in these firehouses? Why, when you leave the public school at night and they turn off the lights, this big building is useless? Nobody's using it, and it's in the middle of our community. How's that possible? Who's paying the taxes for all of this?